Today we're going to be talking about the moss life cycle. And when I talk about moss, those are the little green stubby plants that you see growing along the edges of your house and also growing underneath the shade of a tree. If we take a look at some of these moss, you can see all the little green stubby plants right there. They grow in large clusters and they grow very short for a reason. They don't contain lignin and they don't contain vascular tissue, xylem and phloem, those little pipes that transport things and give plants support. So they need to be short for a reason. And they live in these large clusters so that they can all support each other. They live side by side. One helps hold up the next guy. But when I talk about moss, most people think of the little green stubby plants that I'm looking at right here. And this is the dominant generation, the generation that we're most familiar with. And this generation is called the Gametophyte Generation. So let's go ahead and start the life cycle with the Gametophyte Generation. So we'll go ahead and we'll write Gametophyte Generation. And then the other generation is going to be called the Sporophyte Generation. Remember, moss are going to undergo an alternation of generations just like green algae did. They're going to alternate between haploid and diploid. Haploid and diploid. Now the Gametophyte generation is going to produce gametes. And the Sporophyte generation is going to produce spores. Now let's go ahead and connect these things up. The Gametophyte is going to produce gametes. The gametes are going to produce sporophyte. Sporophyte is going to produce spores, and the spores are going to grow into a new gametophyte. Now the gametophyte comes in two varieties. You can have a male gametophyte or a female gametophyte. And the gametes also come in two varieties. You can have the egg or you can have the sperm. Now obviously the male gametophyte is going to produce the sperm and the female gametophyte is going to produce the eggs. Now let's go ahead and take a look at the ploidy. So everything is going to be haploid except the sporophyte. Sporophyte is going to be 2N, and again everything else is going to be haploid. So N, N, and N. Haploid means that they have one set of chromosomes, one of each type. And again, diploid means that they have two sets of chromosomes, two of each type. Now let's go ahead and draw some pictures of the male and female gametophyte and start there, since this is the dominant generation. So the male gametophyte, I'm going to draw my little moss plant, and here's the leaves. And let's go ahead and draw the rhizoids. These are referred to as rhizoids. They're not official roots because they don't contain vascular tissue, xylem and phloem. They don't have those little pipes. These rhizoids are just long cells that absorb nutrients and absorb water. And this is going to be the male gametophyte. Now near the top of the male gametophyte is going to be an organ. I'm going to denote that with the red color up here. And this organ is going to be called antheridia. And the antheridia are going to produce sperm. Now let's go ahead and do the same thing for the female gametophyte. There's my leaves. Let's go ahead and draw the rhizoids. And we'll draw the female reproductive organ right here near the top again. And this is going to be called the Archegonium. And the Archegonia produce eggs. Now what's going to happen here, eventually the sperm of one moss plant is going to swim over and fertilize the eggs of another moss plant. So obviously these are flagellated sperm, which is important to understand. They have a flagella. And because these because these moss grow so close together, just like this, right next to each other, a single drop of water can literally cover a bunch of moss. So there's a drop of water. And the sperm of one moss plant can literally swim through this drop of water and go over and fertilize the egg of another moss plant. So these plants are very dependent on water for reproduction. So those are our gametophytes. And the gametophytes are going to produce gametes. And when the gametes come together, the sperm and the egg come together. Remember, this is going to be a sperm of a separate moss plant. Sperm of a separate moss plant. They're going to come together. We're going to form a sporophyte. So let's go ahead and take a look at a sporophyte, because most of us are not familiar with the sporophyte generation. So before I draw the sporophyte, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to draw another gametophyte. And I'm going to label that so we don't get confused. There's my rhizoids. So this whole structure here is a gametophyte. In fact, that's going to be a female gametophyte, because I'm going to draw Archegonium right there to produce eggs. And the sperm of a nearby moss plant is going to swim over here and fertilize an egg of this gametophyte, of this female gametophyte. Now what's going to happen here is after fertilization, a new moss plant is going to begin to grow right out of the top of this female gametophyte. And it's going to grow up, 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 up. And then at its top, it's going to form a spore capsule. Now this spore capsule will eventually break open and release spores. So let's just go ahead and label that. That's a spore capsule. And these are the spores. And there's probably going to be thousands of spores in there. Now over here, let's go ahead and label the sporophyte. Now you can see that the sporophyte is actually growing right off the top of the female gametophyte. So the female gametophyte is going to have to supply nutrition for this sporophyte. Let's go ahead and take a look here. If we look inside here again, you're going to see these little antenna-like structures. And these little antenna-like structures that are growing right off of the green stubble, the gametophyte, are going to be our sporophyte. And I bet if you go out and look around your house and you see some moss, that you'll see some of these little antenna-like structures, sporophytes, growing right off the top. And that's what is going on here. Now if we look at all the cells, if we could genetically analyze the cells in the gametophyte, they would all be N, they would all be haploid. And then if we looked at the cells up here in the sporophyte, they would all be 2N. So these are two different organisms that are literally physically connected to each other. And that's just the way they reproduce. And the sporophyte is going to produce spores, and the spores will eventually, remember, a spore is a single cell with a tough outer coating that can grow into a brand new organism all by itself. Now the last thing we want to do here is what process is required to go from N to N? What process will give me the same number and type of chromosomes? That's going to be mitosis. So whenever we're going from N to N, think mitosis. Same thing here, I'm going from N to N, it's got to be mitosis. Now down here we're going from N plus N gives us 2N. So N plus N gives us 2N. What is going to do that? Fertilization. When a sperm fertilizes an egg. And here we're going to go from 2N to N. What process is going to reduce our chromosome number in half? That's going to be meiosis. And that's going to be it for the moss life cycle.